welcome. So those of you who are not real familiar with Wachiska, to give you an introduction into who we are, we've been around for several years, since 1973. We have an area that stretches through 17 counties in southeast Nebraska, so way beyond the Lincoln area. And we have through our national Audubon, there are about 980 members who are part of our independent chapter. We're actually an independent chapter from national. And we also have a local membership group that numbers up to about 325 these days. So it's awesome support. Last year, about this time, we were deep into strategic planning, trying to figure out what we wanted to be when we grow up. And as part of that, we did a survey that had about 800 people completed. And through that survey, that's helped frame Wachiska's focus areas over the next few years. And one of those focus areas is advocacy for the natural environment, which climate has to be a big, important component of. So that's why tonight's presentation fits right into Wachiska's priorities. So we welcome the chance to learn about what Lincoln itself and what your draft climate action plan is. So with that, I am going, just final reminder, keep yourselves on mute if you can. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda Brown, who'll introduce the speakers.
Hi, I'm Linda Brown. I'm a member of the Wachiska Board, also a member of the Wachiska Board Climate Advisory Task Force. I'm joined with Marilyn McNabb and Crystal Stoner on that task force for the board. Tonight, we can thank Marilyn McNabb for pulling this whole program together. Thank you, Marilyn. I want to just tell you how it's going to work. We have 4 panelists. I'm going to introduce the 4 panelists, and they will pass the program between themselves. So we won't keep coming back to me, but I'll be here to facilitate. And we'll hold questions until everyone has presented. Gene Hanlon will be our last presenter. And when we get to the questions, because we're on Zoom, if you have a question, say the name of the person that you want to direct your question to, so that that person can then answer the question. So with that, we get to plunge into what Lincoln's climate resiliency action plan might be. And the first person I want to introduce is Miki Esposito. Miki is Mayor Leirion Gaylor Baird's Senior Policy Advisor on the Mayor's Lincoln Resiliency Initiative. Miki has 13 years of experience working for the city of Lincoln. She led the environmental cleanup that helped create the West Haymarket area, and later was the director of the Lincoln Transportation and Utilities for Lincoln. She's going to explain the climate plan, a little bit about how it was developed, and how we can give feedback. Then she's going to pass the program on to Tim Rinne, our next panelist. Tim will discuss the area dealing with building a resilient local food system. He's a founding member of both the Lincoln-Lancaster County Food Policy Council and the Nebraska Food Council. Along with his neighbors, Tim helped create the Holly Hamlet Neighborhood Garden in their city block, where 20 families, 20 households are now annually growing food on land that was essentially lawns before, green grass. Maybe it was green. Then Tim will pass the program on to Bruce Johnson. Bruce is a board member for the Lower Platte South Natural Resources District. He's a professor emeritus with the Department of Agricultural Economics at UNL, and a founder of the Elder Climate Legacy Project. Bruce is going to talk about natural solutions to the risk of flooding in Lincoln. And flooding is one of the high risks that we are faced with. Gene Hanlon, coordinator of the Citizens for Environmental Improvement Coalition and the retired director of the Lincoln's Waste Management System, will discuss the action area on waste. So Miki, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Linda. I'm among really good company, and I feel really blessed to be here tonight, and thank you for welcoming me. I'm going to go ahead and share screen because I have a presentation. I like to organize my thoughts around presentations, so I hope that's okay with everyone. And hopefully what you're seeing here is Resilient Lincoln. If I can get some head nods saying, yes, I can see the great. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Well, in November of last year, 2020, Mayor had hired me to lead the Resilient Lincoln initiative. She has really three important priorities for her administration. One is this Resilient Lincoln initiative and the implementation of a climate action plan for the city. The other one is One Lincoln, and that is around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And there's some intersections here with environmental justice as well. And then the third big initiative is Lincoln Forward. And as you know, because of coronavirus, that looks a little bit different. Rather than focusing on economic development and growth, it's been really focused more on economic recovery post-COVID. So those are the three big pushes, and this is just one of the three that we're highlighting tonight. So what do we mean by resilience? This is a technical definition that we are sort of using, but in a nutshell, resilience is our ability to maintain systems through a traumatic or hazardous event. Coronavirus pandemic, it's a good example of our ability to bounce back from that type of event. And then also our ability to even adapt or transform through that event. For example, I use this Zoom function. We don't gather together anymore. Rather, we rely on technology to adapt to the new normal, which is the pandemic. And hopefully we get past it and we can resume gathering together, which would be nice. But resilience in a nutshell is our ability to maintain systems, our ability to bounce back from it, and our ability to adapt or innovate within it. Lincoln actually has a lot of success in the sustainability realm, and these are just a few things that I had been a part of as Transportation and Utilities Director and at the city. So we always prioritized conservation, good stewardship, robust infrastructure to protect public health and safety, and prioritize those types of things. But what we're really trying to hone in on here is climate change and be responsive to the risks that it will present to us. And so in 2019, when Mayor joined the city, she, as mayor, she commissioned a very in-depth study. She wanted to understand not just what climate change implications around the globe would look like, but what would it look like specifically for our region, and in particular, Lincoln. And so we have these projections for our region and in Nebraska for out to 2050. And so what we might be experiencing by 2050, if it's business as usual and we don't do anything different, we will experience 5 degrees warmer temperatures than we have today. We'll experience 44 days annually with a heat index over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll experience 10 to 16% increase in winter and spring precipitation totals, 4% drier summers than today, and 15 to 30% increase in heavy precipitation, multi-day extreme precipitation events, and they'll be increased in severity. So this is quite serious. We're going to be having more rain when we don't want it, more precipitation in the fall and the spring and the winter when we don't want it, and we're going to have less water and less rain when we need it in those growing seasons during the summer. And our summers are going to be longer, which also puts a strain on irrigation resources to grow crops in Nebraska. So this is a very serious issue for us. In addition to understanding what the climate change might be in 2050, we also need to assess what risks we're going to be facing. And our consultant Verdis Group with Kim Morrow, she identified 12 climate risks that the City of Lincoln needed to prepare for and begin to plan around in order to adapt and mitigate these risks. The high end of the spectrum is flooding. That is the prominent risk that we have and that we're facing, in addition to drought. In the time that I was director at LTU, I experienced on one end of my post in 2012 a very severe drought that took out our water system because the Platte River was so dry that we had to implement mandatory water restrictions. In 2019, when I left the department as director, we had experienced a pretty significant flood on the Platte River, a historic flood that took out our well field and the power that that energized our wells. So at the bookends of that that post of being director, I started my post with a drought that resulted in mandatory water restrictions and ended with a flood that resulted in mandatory water restrictions. So it is quite significant and it can be very scary for our community. We do have a single source of water supply, so we've been always talking since 2012 about securing a second source, and that could be an interconnection with the with Omaha, the MUD in Omaha, or we could be going independently to the Missouri. But as you can probably imagine, it's quite expensive. And so we have to have lots of conversation with our community about what we do and how to pay for it. Other cascading risks associated with those three primary risks are public health, the impact to vulnerable populations, and how people who are already suffering are going to be exposed to even more risk, our financial and workforce resources and how they're impacted, whether we have antiquated policies that we need to update in order to stay nimble and flexible for the future. We need to talk about fossil fuel reliance in our transportation system and how to move our transportation system away from that reliance. Also food supply, which I know Tim is going to talk about and address tonight, and natural resources, which Bruce will touch on tonight. And then the big thing is just making sure that our public is aware, that they're informed and educated and have information from the city that they need in order to make good decisions about these risks. So knowing what we know about 2050's projections and also the risks that are in front of us that we may be facing, well, what do we do about it? And that's where the planning begins. And really, the City of Lincoln has always done a nice job of planning proactively to make sure that we can take care of our community and keep it safe and healthy and thriving. So as you know, in 2019, Mayor commissioned a study to develop this plan. And born out of that process was a very bold and ambitious vision to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050, and that's relative to 2011 levels. But in addition, we have to be resilient to the climate hazards it will face. So we have to address flooding and we have to address drought and that single source of water supply. And third, that the city itself as an institution would make sure to look at its actions, its policies, its ordinances, its own self, and actually adjust our own behavior to climate change and make sure we were considering these projections and these risks in what we develop for the community. The climate action areas in the plan, there are 8 action areas. This is meant to be very comprehensive for folks. So, you know, if you want to get involved, certainly you can, and it can speak to things that you're passionate about from a holistic point of view. So if you're passionate about transitioning to low carbon energy and you want LES and you want to be involved in watching what LES is doing to seek decarbonization, that's one area. Transportation, we want to decarbonize our transportation system. That includes our buses, that includes our municipal fleets, and we want to encourage people to, as much as possible, go electric, use alternative fuel vehicles. So we really want to promote that, align economic development goals with climate realities. You know, Nebraska is really poised to invest in more solar and wind. We had a big hearing on that recently, and you can see the perspectives that people have about these renewable, clean energy types of things, and it is controversial because it represents a change, but Nebraska can shift from not just being an ag producer, but also a power producer on the global and national scale. Improve protections for and with Lincoln residents. That's all about floodplain management as well as that second source of water supply. Building a resilient local food system, maximizing natural climate solutions, which I know this group will be excited about, reducing waste, which Gene will address tonight, and then engaging residents in co-creating a climate smart future. It's just extremely important for us to be super transparent with our citizens about what we plan to do and what they can do to participate in curbing and combating climate change. So we've gotten to a point where I'm going to kind of check in with you here because we've gotten to a big milestone in this process. When I came on in November, we had a draft plan that was released to the public, and we had promised everyone that we would get out and talk about it and take public comment and feedback on it. And we had been receiving lots and lots of good things. But beginning in 2019, when the whole process began with Verdis, there were over 600 ideas that came forward that were generated from the community, which is really exciting. People want to participate, and they have ideas about what is necessary and how we act now. And so in the draft plan, it incorporated 365 of those ideas for meeting the 80 by 50 vision and building resilience. And Mayor had commissioned a climate resilience task force that was a community-based committee, as well as a sustainability working group that was a city staff committee. And they reviewed these strategies in the draft plan and decided, listen, we want to act right away. We don't want to wait 30 years until 2050. We need to get moving now. And so we also, from a pragmatic standpoint, we also knew that we couldn't do everything all at once. So we itemized and prioritized the initiatives that we could get done within the next 0 to 6 years, which is the term of our capital improvement program, or our budget, our big budget program. And so following those efforts and in consideration of the feedback, the city identified 120 items. This says 125, but it's actually 120, my apologies, to focus on in the next 6 years. And many of those things were things that we already do and want to continue to do, and they're approved and in our budget. And so we're just moving ahead with those items. And then about the other half were new recommendations. And when we got through the list, really only 20 new items were funding dependent or regulatory or otherwise needed council approval. So we have really honed in on about a third of the draft that we want to accomplish in 6 years aggressively. And I'll get into what those prioritized items are. So with respect to transitioning to low carbon energy, that first climate action area, here are some of the things that we have decided are very important, because greenhouse gas emissions being the cause of climate change is something that we have to take ownership of as a community and try as best we can to curb. And so it's two sides of the coin here. First of all, we need to analyze emissions reduction of these key strategies. We want to analyze our landfill gas alternatives. We do produce methane gas out of landfill. Currently, we're burning it, but there's opportunity to actually turn it into fuel, renewable and clean fuel. We also want to aggressively seek to be carbon neutral in all of our municipal buildings and operations 100% by 2035. And so we're really trying to walk the talk as the city, to do everything we can within our power to cut and curb greenhouse gas emissions. The other side of the coin, though, is to understand carbon sinking, and we'll get into that into the natural areas when we talk about maximizing natural climate solutions and how we can actually sequester carbon. In the area of transportation, we can continue to strengthen our public transit systems and convert our municipal fleets to 100% renewable or electric by 2040. We have a strong interest to do that so that we aren't continuing to rely on fossil fuels as an entity. We've been doing that aggressively, even with police cruisers, with health department cars, with our buses. We've been going to biofuels and CNG and electric just to move away from that fossil fuel reliance. The other thing we can simply do, which is a paperwork exercise, is develop a city teleworking policy. We've all learned that we can still be productive at home and work from home and keep those cars from being on the streets. The other thing is just the promotion of multimodal transportation, including enhancing our bike and trail network. Aligning economic development goals with climate realities. We need to invest in renewable sources of energy, and that speaks directly to the LES decarbonization goal by 2040. The board has really taken a big step here. Now LES is at about 46% renewable, and they want to aggressively reach that 2040 goal. They understand that that might be technology dependent, but it's not going to stop them from setting their aims high. And so we really need to support our Lincoln Electric system in that shift. The other thing that Lincoln can do is it can investigate climate resilience bonds. It can investigate where it puts its investments, like pension and retirements. Are we investing our dollars in fossil fuels, and can we remove those fossil fuel investments and shift them to more renewable sources of energy? Again, it's a paperwork exercise and just a different way of thinking and keeping climate at the forefront of our minds. Improving protections for and with Lincoln residents. This is all about the second source of water supply, but also I want to bring your attention to the Salt Creek Resiliency Study. It was a recent study that was just released in the last month. And what it says is that our levee system is about 2 feet below what it should be during a 100-year flood because of updated precipitation rates. So people seem to think, oh, climate change, it's going to be in 2050. No, this is happening right now. In 2014, national data shared that our national data for precipitation rates were updated, and we essentially are experiencing more precipitation in Lincoln than we had been in the 1960s. We were relying on 1960s data. And through this study, it was recognized that our levee system is underbuilt from a 100-year floodplain standpoint. And so we really need to do something about this. And it might involve regulation, but it could also involve a large public project. But at the minimum, it needs to be talked about and discussed, particularly in vulnerable neighborhoods where we have an obligation to update our emergency management plans and ensure that they're protected if flood were to occur or evacuations from neighborhoods were to occur. Building a resilient local food system. I always get questions about this, and what a city normally does with food is it permits these things. We have a health code and we have permit authority over the local food system. So we're taking off our regulatory hat and sort of getting involved a little bit more in this space. And a couple of ways that we can do that is, for one thing, the city has a lot of vacant lots, and we've begun to do some brownfield site assessments on those lots to make sure they get a clean bill of health from an environmental standpoint, so that community partners can use them for urban gardens and urban agriculture. And so one of the people we're partnering with is the People City Mission and the Climate Action Center to do just that. The other thing is the city owns about 1,700 acres of land that we have in row crop production as well as haying. And those lands usually are just held to protect underground infrastructure like water reservoirs or water lines and mains. But we actually have farming contracts on those lands, and we are shifting. We actually changed our farm management contract to require more sustainable and conservation practices on those lands. And then what we're also doing in the implementation of the plan is partnering with someone like Community Crops to grow local food on city property. So that's an exciting project that's coming forward. We're excited about that. Then maximizing natural climate solutions. We obviously want to continue to support prairie restoration and protection of natural resources, including the land trust that's being pushed forward by the Parks Foundation. That's called the Solidago Project, led by Nicole Fleck-Tews and Maggie Stuckey, and it's very exciting what they're doing and talking about to preserve natural prairie right here in our county. And also be a little bit more mindful and aggressive about natural landscapes and how we enhance them from public projects. So those are a couple of things that we want to do to enhance natural solutions. But the big thing we need to do is develop a carbon sequestration plan. I know Bruce is going to talk a little bit about stormwater, but one of the benefits of maintaining these natural areas is just the protection and health of soil, and promoting the ability of photosynthesis to lend itself to carbon sequestration. And so we're pretty excited about having a part in those eco-services and really growing those eco-services even further. And then the reduction of waste. This is a little bit what Gene is going to talk about tonight. We are in the middle of updating the 2040 solid waste plan, and the timing didn't line up too good because they're still working on it, and it'll come out after this plan is adopted. So we'll see what those updates involve, but I do know there is a pilot on the way for a food diversion program and enhanced composting, a community compost plan. So I'm super excited about that. I think that would be a very successful program, knowing our recycling rates and our diversion rates. The success of the cardboard ban, I think people would really get behind a community compost program in Lincoln. We'll continue to do periodic waste characterization studies. We do need a green purchasing policy at the city. Again, this is just about the city walking the talk and being and taking ownership of this issue. So the products that we buy from our vendors, we need to be mindful of the environment and those purchases, and then always encouraging the reduction of single-use plastics in our community. Engaging residents and co-creating a smart future. We have to talk to our citizens. We have to talk to them early and often and make sure that they know what we're doing, but also what they can do to make a difference. And so we'll be doing some intentional education around climate change in Lincoln, but also just having a community conversation with our new Americans who have language barriers and are vulnerable because of those language barriers. So we're going to be really intentional about vulnerable populations in our education efforts. So what is next? We have made some strides here. We have, again, prioritized those key initiatives. We've done a ton of community engagement and a little bit of technical research along the way, but we are setting up for City Council adoption, beginning with a Planning Commission hearing next week, next Wednesday at 1 o'clock. We'll be asking the Planning Commission to recommend that the Climate Action Plan be approved by the City Council. So it's a pretty big milestone next week. City Council adoption is set for March, the middle of March. And I have some dates to share with you on the next slide. But by Earth Day, April 22nd, we want to be implementing this baby. And I'm so excited about that. It's going to be so fun to work with Tim Rinne on food. So this is how you can get involved. And I'll drop these links in the chat too. But our climate action plan is currently on our website. So if you go to lincoln.ne.gov and you click on Resilient Lincoln, you can just scroll down on the first page. You'll see our Resilient Lincoln page, and that's where the climate action plan, you can submit comments there. The other thing is the Planning Commission public hearing next Wednesday at 1. You can submit a letter to the Planning Commission. If you go to our website again, lincoln.ne.gov and keyword Planning Commission, there's a form that you can fill out to submit comments. And then finally, City Council public hearing. You can go to lincoln.ne.gov and if you keyword council, you'll get to this page where you can submit a letter or an email via City Council packet. So if you want to get involved in support, or if you have something you want to say to them about the plan, you can certainly do that. All right, I'm going to kick it over to Tim because I got the direction from Linda that we're not to ask questions till the end. So Tim is now up.
Great. Thank you, Miki. I have to tell you, folks, my heart just soars every time Miki says the word food. All right, because I'll tell you, this is unprecedented to have food mentioned this prominently in a city plan. We've had a comprehensive plan in Lincoln since 1948, and about 5 years ago, Ingrid Kirst, who's on the call tonight, did something to get a few words about food into the comprehensive plan, but otherwise it's never been there. We're going to announce ourselves with authority this year. Okay, this is going to be big stuff, and I'm absolutely pumped about it. Between the action areas and the key initiatives that Miki was talking about there and so forth, we've got an open door. We've got a pathway to build a resilient local food system in Lincoln from the ground up. And so I'm just absolutely I'm ecstatic about this whole monumental thing. This has never happened before. This is big stuff. Okay, there's got to be somebody out there saying, all right, Tim, okay, I'm happy for you. Okay, all right, but what's the big deal about food? I mean, if we went 70 years without talking about it in a comprehensive plan, why is it such a big deal now? And I have to say that's a really good question, okay? And it's one that I myself didn't answer in 53 years of eating, okay? It never even crossed my mind. Where did all of our food come from, I didn't care. It was abundant, it was there. But you know what? That same narrow mindset might have actually even been governing the behavior of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, because they were around since 1988, but it wasn't until 20 years later that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said at a conference in Budapest, Hungary, that, oh, guess what, everybody? You know, all the stuff that we're talking about with climate change, with hotter temps and droughts and wildfires and floods and storms and diseases and pests, it's going to make it harder to grow our food. They'd never talked about that before. It had never come up in 20 years. They were just like Tim Rinne in that respect. I think that most of them were just eating as well. But we are looking, folks, even in the words of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change back in 2008, we are looking at the possibility of a global food crisis. Now, when I saw that, when I read that back in 2008, it caught the attention of me as an eater, all right? Because this is potentially raising the prospect of Tim missing meals, and he's not very interested in that. I probably missed half a dozen meals in my entire life, all right? And so I don't do that sort of thing. Okay, so I decided then that I needed to learn a little bit more about my food system. So I started doing some reading, and almost immediately I came across the expression just-in-time delivery. Had no idea what that meant, except that it turns out to be the policy for the industrial food systems delivery. And this is how they distribute things. They promise everybody that they're going to have whatever you need within 72 hours. They can get it to you. They can truck it to you. And so consequently, our restaurants, our grocery stores, even our schools, they don't really stock more than 72 hours worth of food, okay? Because the delivery trucks are going to bring it. And so why would you have this useless overhead, you know, hanging around, sitting in the shelf, collecting dust and so forth? We'll just let the trucks bring this in every 72 hours. Well, that was food for thought, that really there's only 3 days worth of supply of food in the city. Hadn't thought about that either, all right? Then as I kept reading, this is still 2008, I came across some comments from Lord Cameron of Dillington. And Lord Cameron of Dillington is a gentleman farmer from Somerset, England, who is a member of the British House of Lords. And he is also, still today, as he was in 2008, he is the co-chair of the United Kingdom's all-party parliamentary group on agriculture and food for development. So this is somebody who's had a career, lifetime interest in the whole issue of food and agriculture. Well, he was sitting in his perch in Parliament, watching live television in September of 2005 of Hurricane Katrina slamming the city of New Orleans. And he was fascinated by all of this. And it dawned on him right then that even advanced industrial technological nations like the United States or like the United Kingdom were just 9 meals from anarchy. And when I read that, I thought, what are you talking about? 9 meals from anarchy? Huh? I don't understand that. Well, it turns out that those people in New Orleans who got marooned there, who were trapped, they couldn't get out and the food trucks couldn't get in. So what happens, Lord Cameron said, is that the first day, meals 1 through 3, everybody who's trapped goes to the grocery stores and they load up big. I mean, their shopping carts are full to bursting, all right? The second day, meals 4 through 6, they go back and they clear the shelves. Whatever is left, they buy, they take, all right? And the third day, meals 7 through 9, Lord Cameron said, after there's no food left in the city and after the trucks can't get in, he said, you will have rats, mayhem, and maybe even murder. In 3 days, 9 missed meals, civilization can unravel in the face of hunger. So that taught me, as somebody who works for a peace organization, that, whoa, Tim, I think you've been missing the boat on some of this stuff. Food security is actually a matter of national security. So that raises the question of, so how food secure are we? Well, in our global food system, the average bite of food that we eat travels 2,000 miles to get to our mouth. 1 in 5 bites actually comes from outside the country. That is a long walk to the refrigerator if you need a snack. Here in Nebraska, 90% of the money Nebraskans spend on food leaves the state. 90 cents of every dollar that we spend on food leaves our state economy. And you say, how is that even possible? We're the breadbasket of the world. We're an agricultural powerhouse. But it turns out that we don't grow food for humans here very much. What we actually do is we grow feed for livestock. And you and I, we don't sit down to meals of field corn and soybean meal. We don't. Then about the same time, 2009, the US State Department, under the new Obama administration, decided that they wanted to get a handle on where things stood with respect to the security of our international food supply. So they sent a delegation over to Switzerland to talk to the Nestle Corporation, which is the largest food corporation in the entire world. And they sat down in Switzerland with the Nestle folks and they said, so what do you guys think is going to be happening down the road? And Nestle said in 2009, well, our projections are that by 2025, and that is just 4 years from where we are now, that by 2025, 1/3 of the world will be facing fresh water shortages. And 30% of the world will be facing cereal grain shortages. And that's your rice, and that is your wheat, and that is your corn. Those are your calorie crops. Also in 2009, the United Nations issued their projections for what world population growth was going to look like by mid-century. And they calculated that by 2050, we'd have well over 9 billion people on the face of the earth, which would mean that the demand for food would rise 60%. So here you have Nestle telling us that, you know what, our food supply is going to diminish because of climate change and all these other things. And then the UN is saying, oh, no, we need more food to handle all this new population that we're going to have. All right, last big factoid here. In 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a special report, and they were mandated at the 2015 Paris Climate Conference that in 3 years, they had to come back and give an assessment. They had to give a report on how all these signatory nations were doing in terms of meeting their targets for cutting their greenhouse gas emissions. And so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change went to work. They worked on this for about 3 years, and they released their report in October of 2018. And they said, not exactly a passing grade. There are only 2 countries in the world that were on track to meet their climate targets so that we could stay beneath 1.5 degrees centigrade for an increase in global temperatures to keep us from, falling over into runaway climate change. And those 2 countries were Morocco and the Gambia, 2 African nations. Otherwise, everybody else got an F. They got a failing grade. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said, all right, here's what needs to happen, folks. Starting in 2020, in that decade between 2020 and 2030, the world has to cut half of the greenhouse gas emissions. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to stop runaway climate change. That would be an average of over 7% a year in cuts in our greenhouse gas emissions. We've never done anything like that. And now we're talking about having to do it 10 years in a row. Let's put this in terms that we can understand. Cutting half of the world's greenhouse gas emissions is equivalent to cutting our lifestyles in half. It's cutting our consumption in half. And since the American middle class lives better than 90% of the world's population, it's us who are going to be feeling the brunt of these cuts. If you live in India, if you live in the Morocco or the Gambia, all right, you don't have much to cut. You're already eating at the bottom of the food chain and so forth. So who needs to do it? The haves need to do it. All right. The Lancet is the premier medical journal in the entire world. It's published in the United Kingdom. Well, the Lancet was following all of the stuff that I've just been talking about with you. And they said, how are we going to feed all of these people that we're going to have in the world? How are we going to keep from, plummeting into runaway climate change? What are we going to do? So they sat down and they crafted a diet. And they said, here's what needs to happen, folks. If we're going to be able to feed everybody, keep the world in one piece, and also not open ourselves up to the ravages of climate change. So they said everybody's going to have to eat lower on the food chain. Well, if you're already eating low on the food chain, that's no biggie, okay? But those of you who aren't, you're going to have to move to a plant-based diet, and nobody gets more than the equivalent of 1.5 hamburgers a week. That's your meat portion. All right, so rather than bacon for breakfast, hamburger for lunch, and fried chicken for dinner, okay, and so forth, 1.5 hamburgers a week. Otherwise, the numbers do not add up. Now, I realize that this is not a very popular message to be passing along here, okay, that nobody wants to hear this. When I read all of this, I didn't want to hear it, okay, and so forth, but this is what the data says. And if we're going to dispense with what has just happened the past 4 years where we pay no attention to science, okay, now we've got to start paying attention to the science. This is a particular problem, though, for people who live in the city, for people who live, let's say, in the city of Lincoln. Because ever since World War II, ever since 1945, and prior to that point, prior to 1945, everybody to do their bit for the war effort, they were planting a victory garden. We had home gardens everywhere, all right? And we were doing all that stuff. After 1945, we were trained, if we lived in the city, to think that our role in the food system was to eat. Somebody else was going to produce all that food. We didn't need to worry about this, okay? No, you don't have to do any of that. Your job is to go to the grocery store, is to go to the restaurant, and so forth. Your job is to consume. Well, with everything that we're facing between climate change and biodiversity loss and pandemics and population growth, that gravy train is ending, okay? It is screeching to a halt. Our days of being able to count on somebody else, somewhere else, doing something that we don't understand and we don't have much interest in, all our days of expecting somebody else to produce all the food that we need, they're over. If we expect to have regular meals in the future, starting now, everybody, particularly people who live in the city, are going to have to re-engage with their food supply. City folks are going to have to start pulling their weight in the food system by tearing up their lawns and putting victory gardens back in. Even if they don't have a lawn, you need to be growing in containers, you need to be growing in pots, you need to be growing on windowsills, you need to be buying local food from local producers to keep these people that are doing this for a way of life as their livelihood, to keep them in business. We need to support them, all right? And then I'm going to add one more point. We need to start cooking again. If you're going through the drive-through, if you're ordering pizza for delivery, if you're doing curbside pickup, if you're going out to eat, you don't think about your food supply. You don't. When you stand over a stove, though, for an hour and a half, you think about how much work all of this is, all right? And you think about how, man, I really wish I didn't have to do this every single night and so forth. But this is what connects you to your food supply. This is what connects us to food, because eating is not optional. As humans, we have to eat to live. And on a certain level, growing and cooking our own food keeps us from taking food for granted. So, the takeaways. Localizing our food supply is the most prudent step that we can take to build food security, which is why what the city of Lincoln is doing with its local food initiative in the action plan areas and the key initiatives and all the stuff that we're talking about bringing to the planning commission and the city council and then putting into the comp plan, that is a big deal because it has to do with big eating, all right? So it's an important thing. So here, and this is the takeaway, and I put this in for Miki, okay? I think that this is doing this with the climate action plan and putting food in there and so forth. It's the city government's pledge to make sure that going forward, citizens are not only going to have water to drink, they're going to have food to eat. So thank you. And our next speaker is Bruce Johnson.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tim. That is one big vision that you lay out, Tim. Appreciate that. And I'm glad what the comments that Miki has already made, as well as Tim, so I can kind of purge a little bit of what I had to say. But just quickly, the Climate Action Plan, as Miki mentioned, had 12 areas of key risk. And she mentioned too, that right at the top of that, the most prominent risk probably of all that was identified was flooding. And you think of the history of Lincoln, it's had multiple times of very serious flooding, and in the very recent future as well. And particularly along the Salt Creek portion of our levee system, some 12 miles of levees that flow through Lincoln. And but of those 12 areas of risks, there were also other things also that really relate to the question of flooding. And one of those is disruptive impacts on vulnerable areas and populations. And just think where our low areas are that are more prone to flooding. And you think of very much marginal folks that that really are probably not very able to deal with it at all. And so that is a bothersome situation. But also then the natural resources that we need to maintain, and our water and our land, and what we really have to make for a resilient future. Now, the 8 action strategies that Miki went through, and she even mentioned this one, natural climate solutions. That's a 3-word phrase that should resonate with every one of us and be our call for action. Nature has natural solutions that we have kind of set aside for many reasons and for many years. And it's time to reboot and really come back in humbleness, I think, to what nature can do for us. And so how does this relate to flood management? Well, as mentioned, the Salt Creek Resiliency Study was recently completed. Olson's Engineering in partnership with the Lower Platte NRD and the city and other entities did a good assessment of our Salt Creek flood control system. The dams that surround Lincoln that were put in more than 50 years ago, and of course our levee system as well, more than 50 years of old in terms of that. And we thought we probably had it not too many years back, the idea that, well, we're okay for 100-year events, storm events, the probability once every 100 years you might have to deal with it. Well, again, more recent evidence proves that no, we basically have a flood management structural system in place for about a 50-year event, once every 50 years. And by goodness, those events are coming more frequently than that, and probably with much more intensity than that too. So what do we do? And the Olson study, and I'm not blaming the Olson engineering firm at all, but that's the reality of what they looked at, is that we can't build our way out of flood risk with more structures. We can't build enough dams up in the watershed. That's cost prohibitive, as is also raising the levees. That's just not in any way economically feasible to think about that. And so we're kind of in a pickle. Sure, we can accommodate and help areas and people that are really vulnerable to flooding when flood occurs. And folks, that's a lot different, to be in a reactionary mode of cleanup and dealing with damage than it is to be proactive. So it really is time, and thank goodness for the whole mindset of the folks behind and working on this climate action plan, to think outside the box. And to really get serious about this, and in relationship to flooding, that means thinking non-structural flood management. And basically, it gets down to expanding water holding capacity of working agricultural lands, our row crops in the Salt Creek watershed. And this has been talked about and used to some extent in other areas. It really hasn't entered into the mindset that much that we see a lot of other folks doing it. But here's Lincoln beginning to think that way. And when you think about natural climate solutions, about a fourth of the 120 solutions listed, they are what you would call natural climate solutions. And this one is really one that says, Strategy 106, in response to findings of the Salt Creek Resiliency Study, assemble key partners and leaders in the city and the county to develop comprehensive strategies that reduce flooding risks, improve soil health, sequester carbon, and maintain natural systems within the city and the county. Now we're starting to think of kind of a European model. Yeah, we have our city, but we really value the surrounding areas, the green belts, and understand how we're all integrated together. And that's the essence of that strategy, and it's in the plan. Quick comment or two on the basics of that. And we have to go back to kind of the soil scientists and kind of see what we're dealing with, because land and soil has a lot of different capacities. And part of that is its ability to hold water, depending on how it's used and how it's structured. Organic matter is a key part of that. And the Natural Resource Conservation Service of USDA estimates that for every 1% of soil that's organic matter, you have the ability to retain about 20,000 gallons of water in that soil in a storm event for every 1% of organic matter. The more organic matter you have, the more you can retain it where the rain falls. It doesn't run off and cause all kinds of erosion and pollution and downstream flooding. Now, think about Salt Creek watershed. And we all know we're sort of in a basin. You can't drive into Lincoln without looking down at Lincoln, unless you're coming back from Omaha on Highway 6 through Waverly. Everywhere else, the watershed is draining down towards Lincoln. Not all of it, but key parts of it, 20% or more of our area. And that watershed is 529,000 acres. That's a very big watershed. When you think what comes from down through Oak Creek from the northwest, the Haynes Branch, certainly Salt Creek and so forth, it all is moving that way. Now, of that watershed, about 316,000 acres would be under row crops in any given year, and under conventional, for the most part, under conventional agricultural practices. Now, under conventional agricultural practices, the organic matter is about 2% when you get soil tests. And it's not all that big of an interest on the part of how agriculture is done anymore, but it should be. Actually, a healthy soil of row crop land would be better to be at 4% organic matter or more. Now think about this. If a soil enhancement program were put in place on the Salt Creek watershed, that we went from just 2% to 3% organic matter, on half of the cropland, not just all of it, could be voluntary, and half of it is signed up in a multi-year crop enhancement program to take organic matter from where it's at now, 2% to 3%. That would lead to water retention in a major rainfall event of about 9,700 acre feet of water that would otherwise be flowing down to and through Lincoln in a storm event, 9,700 acre feet. And we're kind of crunching numbers here from what we've worked with Ben Higgins in the Lincoln Watershed Management Office. Now, currently our 50-year flood management structure can handle about 36,000 acre feet coming through Lincoln, Salt Creek, in a storm event in 12-hour period, okay? That 100-year storm event that we wish we were at, you would have to handle 45,000 acre feet coming through Lincoln in a storm event. And that represents 2 feet, as Miki mentioned, 2 feet over the tip of the levees, which, by the way, you know, we handled 36,000 feet 5 years ago in 2015. But a 100-year event, only a matter of time before we see it. It will be one big flooding experience, and not a very pretty one too. So we have to, you know, kind of think what this is about. We have, you know, and again, if we raised it just 1% with a 5-year program, we would have 9,700 acre feet that stays up on the watershed, on the cropland, and doesn't come flowing down through Lincoln. So this might be our option. Think non-structural flood management with soil enhancement of our working lands. Now, who pays for it and how much does it cost? Well, it might take 5 years with $25 per acre incentives for landowners and farmers for 5 years, and that amount might be $20 million. Who's going to pay for that? We are, but we're getting that eco service of flood protection, and that means, you know, that's no more than right. We need these kinds of eco services. So, you know, it really is an option that this climate action plan is suggesting we really give a good hard look and work out the details of this. Now, keep in mind too that this financial reimbursement can be part of a whole bunch of other eco services that are simultaneously provided. You know, you think about natural climate solutions, there are complementary benefits that really thrive. You stack the benefits in terms of flooding management, reduced downstream pollution and erosion, crop carbon sequestration, by the way, which is an evolving market here for carbon credits and putting carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, wildlife, pollinator habitat, and certainly, as Tim would suggest, we need to keep in mind enhanced resiliency and productive of our agricultural lands within our local community. And yes, Lancaster County is our local community. So those are some options that we really have ahead. And, you know, there are outside grant dollars for this through FEMA, through flood mitigation strategies, through USDA, a number of different things. Sometimes funding going for those purposes that don't get used because nobody's really thinking outside the box. Lincoln has the opportunity to do this and be a leader for a municipality of 300,000 people like no other place in the country. And here we are embracing the bigger community in a collaborative and cooperative way. Yeah, the Hickmans and the Waverleys in the rural communities and Pam Digman's roads and bridges would all say thank you, you know, if we work together this way. So I think it's, you know, it's one component of this long-term strategy that's really visionary, you know. And I love the mayor's words at the press conference last week when they revealed the plan, saying it's a bold and achievable vision that will chart the course of the coming years. We work together, we can harness our collective energy for innovation, for problem solving, and for just for a more just community to ensure that Lincoln can thrive into 2050 and beyond. That to me is exciting action steps. And so, hey, and with this we turn to Gene Hanlon.
Thank you, Bruce. First, I want to correct my introduction. I wasn't a director of solid waste management. I worked as recycling coordinator for a number of years for the city. And I really appreciate being able to participate in this panel. I'm learning a lot of things here. And I also want to commend the mayor and Miki and all the other city staff for developing the Lincoln vision on a climate smart future. The depth and breadth of that document is very impressive. Miki mentioned that the city has established this 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and Tim referred to the IPCC goal of a 50% reduction by the year 2030. And I really would like to see the city incorporate a interim goal in their plan of action, that we should also be trying to strive for that. And in my approach in talking about waste today, I figured I'd just focus on three strategies in that vision that the city cited. But I first want to say that, waste reduction doesn't bring the reduction in carbon greenhouse gas emissions that decarbonizing energy or transportation or decentralizing the food system does, but it does, in fact, make some significant changes in reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to use the 2018 cardboard disposal ban as an example. When that was instituted in April of 2018, and they went back in later that year and looked what was being disposed of in the landfill, they estimated that the cardboard disposal ban diverted 28 million pounds of cardboard from disposal. And that material was recycled instead of being thrown away in the landfill. It doesn't make sense to spend $43 a ton to bury that type of material that has value. But by diverting that material, the city reduced the greenhouse gas emissions by 42,500 metric tons of CO2 equivalents. And they're doing that each year from here on out. So the three systemic strategies that were in the vision plan that I think, what I call big ideas that I'd like to see the city work for, are important in achieving those goals. I'm just going to read the first one that was in the plan. Evaluate a full spectrum of alternatives to current, and in parentheses, waste collection systems, including neighborhood zoning requirements for haulers, the formation of a hauler cooperative, or multiple or single contracts for one hauler with a city for all the garbage and recycling pickups. Now, in my residential street, I have 5 garbage trucks going down my street each week. Our current market-based system is perhaps the most inefficient and most costly way to collect waste in communities across the country. A block away from me, they don't have 5 trucks going down, they have 6 going down that block. So the way the Lincoln Solid Waste Management System is set up, you subscribe to your waste collection services. You can subscribe just for waste only. The average cost of that is about $23 a month. You can add yard waste collection for an 8-month period. The average cost of that is $10 a month. And then you can add curbside recycling to that, which is another $10 a month. You add that up, and you look at Lincoln households, we're paying anywhere from $23 a month to $43 a month for our waste collection. And that doesn't sound like much, but when you add it up for all of the single family and duplex households, and you look at the subscription for different levels and you estimate that, the city of Lincoln is spending over $26 million in the single family households and duplexes are spending about $26 million to collect our solid waste. That's a lot of money. Now, I've done some research on other Nebraska cities that do have organized collection and what they have to pay for garbage collection. And I believe that if the city would adopt some principles to organize our collection system, that we could receive our trash, yard waste, and recycling collection for what we currently pay for waste collection only. It would be less than or equal to the $23 a month that we currently pay. That would be a savings of about $4.5 million a year that would be in the pockets of homeowners. Now, the more important part of that is the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in my case, the average garbage truck weighs about 33,000 pounds, empty. So as they start down my street, I'm one of the first houses, they constantly stop and go. That motor is running all the time. And as they go, they're adding weight to that truck. They consume a lot of gas. in that truck. The average amount of gas they use is about 5 gallons of gas per mile. I mean, 5 miles per gallon of is their fuel efficiency. So they're not very efficient. So let's just take a look at my street. If the city did an organized collection and we had 3 garbage trucks, one for waste, one for yard waste, and one for recycling down my truck, instead of the current 5, there would be a 40% reduction in the vehicle miles traveled, and in my mind, pretty close to the amount of greenhouse gas emissions related to that. Two trucks out of 5 is 40%. It's a simple math, but I think we'd come close to that. The block down the street, 6 trucks going down that street, going down to 3, you might have a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions as a result of reduced miles traveled. And the other benefit of having reduced truck traffic of 33,000 pound vehicles, they can have a payload of 9 tons on top of that, is the wear and tear on our streets. You'll get an extended life on our alleys and street. So simply put, an organized waste collection system will put money in our pockets, improve the aesthetics in the neighborhood, because you wouldn't have houses putting out garbage cans in the curb different days of the week. It would improve safety because you wouldn't have as many trucks going down the street. And it would reduce greenhouse emissions compared to our current waste collection system. Now, that second systemic strategy or big idea that was in the plan that I think has strong merits, and it's kind of goes glove in hand with the organized collection, is this. It says, consider the implementation of volume-based fees for waste collection. These systems require those who generate more waste to pay higher bills, which incentivizes waste reduction and recycling. Now, a volume-based fee system is like if you did that for waste, it's like all the other utilities that we have, water, electricity, you pay by the amount that you use. I don't see why a widower in a home should pay the same amount for garbage collection that a six-person family should. So the volume-based fee is fairer and it's more equitable. Volume-based pricing also is a single most effective way to motivate residents to reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost. Because the less garbage you generate, you pay, and the more you divert. Some communities that have instituted volume-based pricing has had a 17% increase in recycling, just like that. Some communities have also experienced up to a 40% decrease in the amount of waste sent to the landfill. A lot of that depends on how you structure that graduated fee for the volume. So how could you do that in Lincoln? It's pretty simple. You base your prices on the size of the container. You can have a 35-gallon container, a 65-gallon container, or a 95-gallon container. My hauler gave my wife and I a 95-gallon container. It takes us 4 weeks to fill that up. So I haven't taken it out the last 3 weeks, primarily because of the snow and the cold weather, and our parking, our driveway's full. But a lot of people don't need a 95-gallon cart if you recycle and you compost in your backyard. I'm going to take the city of Bellevue, Nebraska as an example for volume-based fees. They have a franchise system for their community. In 2017, they went out for bids requesting volume-based pricing from the waste collector. And they had costs for a 35, 65, and 95-gallon container. And not only did you pick up waste for that fee, but you also picked up yard waste and recycling. So you had three services. The cost of a 95-gallon container, the highest cost for the city of Bellevue, is $18.99 for those 3 services. Here in Lincoln, we're paying about $43 for that. So if the city was able to have organized collection plus volume-based fees, I think single family and duplex households in Lincoln could save as much as $6 to $7 million if they would do that. It would be significant savings. I think it would be the systemic changes to bring about changes in our behavior, because that's really what we're after with this sort of stuff. And the third systemic change I would recommend is the wording in the plan is develop citywide organic waste collection and compost utilization system. Now, in 2018, the city did that waste characterization study, and they found that 33% of the waste going to the Bluff Road landfill delivered from garbage trucks is organic material. It's food waste, it's non-recyclable paper, and other organic material like wood waste and things. That amounts to about 119 million pounds of material. Now, if we could separate that material and compost it, we could create a valuable soil amendment that gets to what Bruce was just talking about, of amending our soils to make the soils healthier, to grow healthy plants, increase the water holding capacity of the soil, and help with that carbon sequestration that Miki referred to as well. So you can do this in a phased manner, and Miki referred to that's one element in their 6-year plan, is trying to do a pilot project. You can start with commercial restaurants or food suppliers or food processors, and develop a track record, and then move on from there. So I think those three systemic changes, if the city would work towards those, we would be very easily achieve that 50% reduction by 2030 and the 80% reduction by 2050. With that, I'll refer it back to Linda and begin the questions and further discussion.
I invite you to direct your questions to one of the panelists, and I think we're going to limit this to about 12 minutes, and then I'll shut you off. So think fast.
Linda, this is Teresa. And in the chat box, there is a question I think Gene can address. It's if I can find it. Gene, would private haulers have a legitimate complaint that they would be put out of business in Lincoln? Who would decide which haulers are allowed to stay in business? And likewise, there's a comment further down that Omaha has only one contractor, but whether they were in a similar situation and switched over, or if they've always had just one contractor.
Yeah. There's a number of communities across the country, from Tulsa, Oklahoma to St. Paul, Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, that had private collection systems that we currently have. And I think that there's a strong interest by the city to work collaboratively with our waste haulers. In the case of Tulsa, the haulers came together and bid on the contract, and were able to get that. They did it in a cooperatively, they formed their own corporation and bid on it and got that contract. Same thing in St. Paul. So it is possible that you can work with the existing private sector haulers. You won't put them out of businesses, but they need to be working together, provide efficient services for the community. And in case of Omaha, they do have a single contractor. And I think that, and there have been complaints on the level of service that Omaha has received, but I think through proper contract management and oversight and requirements and performance metrics by the hauler, by the city for the hauler, that many of those problems can be avoided.
Thank you.
This is Penny Greer. I'm sorry, I didn't put my picture up yet. This is a question for Bruce and Tim. My life is spent studying climate. I don't like what I learn, but I'm learning a lot. I'm looking also at, when you speak of runaway climate change, Tim, we'll have to talk, because I know we're moving towards a hothouse climate, but I'm not sure how the runaway aspect will end up working. We're all struggling to understand that. My concern is about drought. As we know, with the Nebraska plan that was written by the university climate folks, that was really discussed at some length. And we all know that with spring coming earlier, right here in Lincoln, with our primary source being the Platte River, that's not, the spring melt will not help us through the hot months of summer. And as 100-degree temperature days increase, which we also know is coming, we know we're going to be dealing with drought. Drought as well as extreme precipitation, both. So what you're saying, Bruce, is absolutely a threat for sure. And we're going to get, I don't even like to use those words anymore because it's so misleading, 100-year events. We've got to find another way to quickly characterize them because the language is not clear, but as we all know. So how are we going to deal with drought? Because I think that's as big a concern as extreme precipitation, if not more of one. Love to hear from Bruce and Tim and anyone else.
Well,
thank you for answering my questions.
Thanks, Penny. That is a key thing. You know, we did have a real episode, as Miki mentioned, in 2012. That was a flash drought. Lord help us if we would have had 3 years like that in a row. And even in a flash drought of 3 months of intensive heat in the summer, we had some damage done that takes years to recover, not just a drawdown of our aquifers and so forth like that, but in the soil itself. We are looking at healthy soils that are resilient and hold water. And so as we're holding it from going down through Lincoln, we are providing a store of water for getting through drought periods, larger or small. But at the same time, we keep the soil alive with microbial activity and keeps it able to be, resilient in that regard. When we have hot, dry periods and that soil is exposed and just gets caked, and you can put a yardstick down in a crack in the ground, you have lost your microbial activity. It's dead. We talk about desertification in Africa. Hey, there's desertification when we hit those kinds of extreme weather events. And we're losing ground in terms of our sustainable soil. And of course, with drought comes dust bowls and dust winds and everything kind of falls apart. We've got to get back to dealing with the land in a more holistic way.
I'm going to be a terrible geologist to tell you all something you may not know, but we know in the geologic record here in Nebraska, we actually had a 37-year drought. It wasn't all that far away in geologic time. 37 years, guys, but you all may know that. It's horrifying, but go ahead. Tim, what do you think? What are we going to do about drought?
Linda, do I have 2 minutes? Okay, all right. Well, first of all, we all understand that Lincoln should have never been built here. Okay, there's no water supply, all right, which is why for a century now, we've been going to Ashland to get our water, because we have water for like 25,000 people here, and otherwise it's salinated and we can't really use it. So when Miki is talking about the fact that we need to find a second water supply, whether it's building a pipeline to the Missouri or reapportioning the Ashland well fields with Omaha or whatever like this, I'm for it, because we are a water-starved city. Now, there are things that we can do about this. Of course, having bluegrass lawns everywhere and so forth, particularly if you don't have small children that can play on them, okay, it's ridiculous. And so that's just wasting the water that we do have. And so we need to start shifting away from that. But it's a mistake to think that if you start growing vegetables in your yard that you don't need water, okay? You're not wasting it, all right, but you're using it. And so when we had the water restrictions put in place back in 2012, I was told by the city that just like somebody who was restricted from washing their car and somebody who was restricted from filling their swimming pool or watering their lawn. I was restricted from watering my garden. And so I, of course, appealed to this. I mean, I appealed this whole issue to the city, okay? And I didn't get it fixed that summer, but it did get fixed before the following year that, okay, we would exempt gardens. But those gardens still use water. So where's that water going to come from? And this is where we've got to be talking about what is our long-term plan, strategy going to be to address this. You know, if we go to the Missouri River, my understanding is, and I'm not even close to being a geologist, but my understanding is most of that water is runoff from the Rockies. All right. Well, okay. What if we are getting warmer temperatures and you get most of your precipitation as rain rather than snow, so you don't get snow melt any longer and it all runs downstream? All right. There's going to be no water up in the Rockies to feed you and so forth. So nobody has answers for this. But this is the sort of stuff that we need to start tackling now. In the meantime, we should quit wasting water. So all this talk about, you know, if you don't want to plant a garden, at least put in native plants. Absolutely put in native plants. They will put down deep roots and they will go dormant. And then they will come back. All right. But this is, once again, a major shift in the way that we look at the world and the way that we do business. And we're not ready to start that culture war yet.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Bruce.
Bruce, this is Troy Cash Brown, and I'm a locally grown foods enthusiast and alternative agriculture individual, and believe that you remind me of a forage specialist that worked with Terry Gompert in improving Nebraska farming and agriculture in an alternative way. The fact of the matter is that since 2011, over 1 million acres of grassland was taken out of grassland and put into crop production in the upper estuary or upper watersheds of Nebraska. And with these bare hills of large equipment operation for cropping, some even with pivots, caused the $6.1 billion plus flood because there was nothing to stop the water flow from all of the watersheds in Nebraska through Nebraska long before it got to the Missouri River. And correct me if I'm wrong, but last year, as a amendment that was tacked on to a Christmas tree bill passed by the unicameral, Senator Erdman has put in that local areas are responsible for any flood damage in their areas without going to the source of the problem, which is farmers not using terraces, water holding capabilities, and large amounts of rain washing downstream in overpowering the lower watershed that we have and causing the damage. Do you believe that putting more emphasis, according to Professor Kozelka with the Natural Resources School at UNL, talked about how much of this water can be stopped long before it gets to the watershed of Nebraska or of Lincoln and causes flooding, and which was part of the reason that the Pawnee and some of the other recreational areas were built. Unfortunately, terraces were not used effectively, and so Pawnee right now has so much silt in it that that's what's causing the deadly blue algae during the warm season because of no water and it's too hot in the water. Can we repair, do things to around Lincoln to enforce the regulations that the USDA has to stop farmers from and landowners from allowing so much erosion from water and soil and damaging our county roads and structures and hold them accountable for the damage that they're causing.
Troy, I'm going to step in here. Bruce, if you can have 2 minutes, and then Kay Cottis has a question, and then I think we're going to close it out because we're already at 9:15.
Well, the quick response is this is a very complex issue, and we really don't have too much of a regulatory rule over private ownership. Yes, there are some, but the point is, modern industrial agriculture, as we see it done conventionally, is not sustainable. It's using synthetic inputs. It's going to larger and larger with smaller economic margins. And in a sense, it's on a track that's just about ready to come to an end. We need to move towards that regenerative thing and make the agricultural producer and landowner a true steward of the land, not necessarily make it, but invite them to be, and they would take that up and be good stewards. It's going to take a little bit of financial reimbursement to do that. And that's where we all work together. There's no reason why we couldn't have some real advantageous steps in that regard. We do have a soil health bill that was just passed, and it was even debated and brought out of committee last week for the legislature to accept it. Not really any funding or any blessing at all from our governor and state agencies at this point, but by golly, I think we need to let them know that that's important to do in terms of the future. But enough said on that. That's a huge, huge issue.
Okay. Thank you. Kay Cottis, I think you have a question. You have your hand up. Okay, I don't hear anything coming from Kay. I want to thank everybody. You've just been great panelists, and obviously people are fascinated. So we've just kind of touched the iceberg. I invite you to go to the city website and read some more for yourselves, and let's give some input. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, thank you.
All right, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks again.
Good night.
A good time.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.